Hey, it's Dr. Claw here with an explanation of the current cultural connections assignment. So, like most of the assignments in the Monsters and Brit Lit class, you can complete this on any of our texts. My current example is on Frankenstein, but the explanation applies to all current cultural connections assignments. So the goal of the assignment is for you to recognize similarities between your own modern culture and the cultures producing the text we read. Um, and this can be a fun assignment, but it can be a little unnerving as well because as we read these older texts, it's easy to think like, wow, these people were just, uneducated or really intolerant or whatever. But as you delve into this connection, you might discover that there are uncomfortable similarities between the two cultures. And so this assignment is a chance for you to use what you're reading in the old literature to think critically about your own culture. So it can be an interesting assignment for sure. Okay, so what you're going to do is you pick your text. So in this case, Frankenstein, Mary Shelley's novel, and you'll think of a monster in modern culture that you find similar to a monster in this text. So to be clear, the connection you're looking for is between the monsters, not between the stories. So you don't need to find a modern story that kind of retells the story arc of Frankenstein. What you need to do is find a monster in modern culture that reminds you of the monster in the text of Frankenstein in some way. So maybe you're thinking about a creature that's also assembled from various parts. So maybe you're looking at a cyborg or a robot or something like that. Or it could be something more fantastical for that matter. But the goal here is that you're connecting the monsters. And it doesn't actually matter if the modern monster, if the story that that monster appears in is similar or dissimilar to the story that Frankenstein appears in Mary Shelley's novel. So don't worry about the story. This is about connecting the monsters. And the reason that we want to look at the monsters rather than the story is because monsters give us a way to think about what a culture fears. And you've been doing that as you've been analyzing these older British literature texts. This is your opportunity to do that using a more modern text. So you can pick monsters from anything that's an art form. So I'm looking for fictional stuff, something that is created rather than something real. And so you could look at monsters from books, movies, TV shows, music, graphic novels, other art forms, maybe visual art, spoken word poetry, any kind of artistic medium. And if you are looking at an art form and you're concerned that maybe it doesn't count or whatever, just reach out to me and ask me. And you could even ask me on Yellow Dig so that other students can benefit from my response. But definitely reach out to me if there's an art form you're looking at and you're not sure. Your modern selection should be from the 20th or 21st century. So that's something from the 1900s or the 2000s, because anything before that is really not your own modern culture. And honestly, like the early 1900s is not really your modern culture in either. So do keep in mind this should be a modern monster. Okay, so once you've picked your monster, you will write a reflection comparing the two monsters. And I've got 3 different categories that I want you to think about in your reflection. So what are the similarities and differences between the monsters? So likely there's something similar about them, and that's why you picked them, but there's probably something different about them as well. What was it that made you think that the monsters were worth comparing? Then you'll move into analysis. What aspects of the monsters seem significant? How do you interpret these aspects of the monster? And what evidence leads you to this interpretation? So you'll do this for each monster. What seems significant about the older monster, the monster from our syllabus text, and what seems significant about the modern monster that you're looking at? So you'll do some interpretation of aspects of these monsters. So basically, when I'm talking about aspects, I'm thinking about factual composition of the monsters. Like what do the text or art form tell us about these monsters? And then what can we interpret from what we do know about these monsters? And then finally, you'll come to a conclusion. What does each monster reveal about the culture's fears? So you'll have a section where you talk about what the British literature monster reveals about the culture that produced it. So what kind of fears does that monster seem to represent? And then you'll talk about what does the modern monster reveal about the culture that produced it? What kinds of fears does that modern monster seem to embody? And then finally, I would like you to provide an image, video clip, or auditory example of your modern monster. So this is your opportunity to show me and then show your class who or what is this monster? What does it look like, sound like? What information do we have about this monster? So this is the only assignment that you have where you will submit your reflection and the image to Canvas as a normal assignment, but you'll also post your reflection and your example image, video clip, whatever, to Yellowdig. And you'll use the topic tag cultural connection. And this is a great opportunity for you to share the connections that you're seeing between the text in our British literature class to stuff from outside our class. And you might be surprised that other people are like, oh my gosh, yeah, I totally made that connection. Or other people are like, I did not see that connection at all. So it's a great way to spark conversation about how these older texts fit in with our own modern culture. And yeah, I think I've talked about the why a little bit already. So thinking about connections, similarities between these older cultures and our own cultures, and helping you think critically about what your own culture fears and what might cause or feed into that fear. And when you share with your classmates, you'll get other perspectives about the monsters, about the fears, and about the cultural observations that you've discovered. All right, and that is it. Oh, and the rubric. So I will be evaluating your comparison, your analysis, and your conclusions, which I do divide the instructions up into those categories. So you're in your comparison, have you actually compared a monster from a text in our course to a monster in modern culture? Have you chosen from the correct time period for your modern one, so 20th or 21st century? Have you explained both the similarities and the differences? And have you explained what makes them seem worth comparing? So basically, have you fully answered all the questions in the assignment prompt for the comparison section? In the analysis section, I'm looking for an excellent score. I expect you to look at more than one aspect of the monsters that seem significant. And then I'll ask you to explain your interpretations of the monsters and provide evidence that led you to these interpretations. So you should be able to point to like, oh, it was this aspect of this monster that makes me interpret the fear the way that I'm interpreting it. And then finally, this is probably the hardest part, but once you've done the earlier work, the comparison and the analysis, it should arise pretty naturally from that, which is explaining what each monster reveals about each culture's fear. So you do need to talk about the fear that each monster reveals from each culture. So 2 cultures, minimum of 2 fears. And you might find more than 1 fear. That's fine, but you need a minimum of 2 here, 1 for each culture. And then you will take your comparison and your conclusions one step further from just saying these are the fears revealed to evaluate what you learn from comparing those 2 fears. So the monsters are similar. Are the fears similar? Do these cultures fear the same thing? Is there some difference in these fears? What can you learn from those differences? What are the nuances of the fears that you're seeing? And when you compare these cultures, what kinds of similarities and differences are you seeing? So the conclusion section is where you're starting to evaluate the observations that you have made and the comparisons that you've made and trying to understand what are the larger ramifications of these comparisons that you've just made. And then finally, I will evaluate you on the presentation portion, which is that it should include some kind of example of the modern monster. So whether that's an image, a video clip, an auditory snippet, if you're choosing a monster from a song or something like that, or from like spoken word poetry or something like that. It should be included with the assignment. And that's fine if your audio visual component is a separate file that you upload to Canvas, that's fine. On Yellow Dig, it should be attached to the Yellow Dig assignment in some way, either using the attach content button or as a link if it's something that's, directly hosted on a website. And then when you post it to Canvas, you'll need to include the proper topic tag, which is that cultural connections topic tag, in order to receive full points for your presentation aspect of the rubric. And that is it. As always, you can tag me with the @ symbol on Yellow Dig and use the Q&A tag if you have questions about this assignment.